Using BMPload with the SLCD43 controller. BMPload is used to download bitmaps, macros, and fonts, create and load .bin files, set module configuration parameters, and download new module firmware. In this video, you will learn how to use BMPload with the SLCD43 controller. The module has been unpacked and connected to a COM port on the PC, as described in the Unpacking a Dev Kit video on reachtech.com/tutorials. The features of BMPload and the commands used in the macros in this video are described in the software reference manual available on reachtech.com/downloads. Now we're going to take a look at some of the features in BMPload. In the upper left-hand corner, you'll see a list box that shows all of the bitmaps that have been loaded so far. Underneath that, you'll see buttons to add BMPs to the list, remove BMPs from the list, load a list of BMPs from a file, and save a list of BMPs to a file. On the right-hand side, you'll see buttons for add macro file, add font list, and add firmware. Each of these brings up a file browser that you can use to select the file that you want to load. Underneath the BMP list box, you'll see a section for selecting the COM port that's connected to your display and the baud rate. At the very bottom of the BMPload window, you'll see an area where you can set various parameters that are configurable in the SLCD. Finally, in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see the Store into SLCD button. Once you have bitmaps, macros, and fonts loaded and all of your settings set, you click on Store into SLCD to save the information into your display. The first thing you want to do when you start BMPload is to make sure your port settings are correct. On my system, COM1 is a terminal emulator that talks to the display module, and COM3 is connected to the USB port on the display module, so I use COM3 for my downloads. You'll want to set your baud rate to the default baud rate of the display module, 115.2, unless you've changed it to something else. You also want to make sure that the USB autobaud checkbox is checked so that BMPload can negotiate a higher baud rate when using USB ports. Now we're going to download a macro file to the display. Click on the Add Macro File button. Browse to the folder that has your macro file. Click on the macro file and click on Open. Then click on the Store into SLCD button. Note that the macro file is in the zip file for this video. Once the download is complete, you can use the lsmac command to see the macro that's loaded, and you can use the m command to run it. In this case there's one macro, so I say m1, and you can see the text that was printed in the t command is on the screen. Now we're going to add some bitmaps to the display module. Click on Add BMP, browse to the folder that has your bitmaps, select a bitmap, and click Open. If you click on a bitmap in the list, the details about the bitmap will show up on the right-hand side. If you want to add multiple bitmaps, select them and click Open. In this case, you'll notice they loaded out of order. That's because the Sort BMP Files When Added Loaded button was not checked. We'll check that, delete these files, add them again, and you notice they're in order now. Now check on Store into SLCD. When you're downloading bitmaps, macros, and fonts to the display module, be aware that all of these files are downloaded as a single package, and it overwrites anything that's currently loaded, so you need to keep specifying everything that you want in one package. When the bitmaps are downloaded, you can go back to the terminal emulator and do an ls bmp command to see the list of bitmaps. You can draw a bitmap with the xi command, xi bitmap number and coordinates. Bitmap 1 is a full screen bitmap, and we're going to draw it at the screen origin in the upper left hand corner. You can also create a list of bitmap files that you can use instead of loading each bitmap individually. To do this, you do need to load them all individually the first time, but then you click on the Save BMP List button. This brings up a file browser, which you can use to go to the selected folder, enter a file name, we'll call it bitmaps, it'll append .list, and click Save. Now you have a file with a listing of all the bitmaps that you want for this application. To show you how that works, we'll remove all these bitmaps, and instead of adding bitmaps, we'll load BMP list. Again, browse to your bitmaps.list file and click Open, and you see that all the bitmaps are populated automatically. This is very useful if you have a large number of bitmaps and you want to keep them in a specific order. And finally, we're going to load a font into the display. Click on Add Font List, browse to the folder where your font file is, click on the font file, and click Open. You'll need to see the software reference manual for details about the font file. Click Store into SLCD. When the download is done, you can go back to your terminal emulator, and if you just use ls, it'll give you a list of everything that's been downloaded. The first record are the macros, then the next three, in this case, are the bitmaps, and finally the last one is the font. You can get a list of available fonts with the F ? Command. In this case, the last font is the one we just loaded. Its alias is CG22, and that happens to be Century Gothic 22 point. If we rerun macro 1 with the current font, you can see the text on the display. If we set the font to CG22, which is our new font, and then rerun macro 1, you can see that same string is using the new font. Now I'm going to show you some of the other features in BMPload. In the Extra Settings area, you can adjust configurable parameters on the SLCD. You can set the power on macro, the splash screen bitmap number, the control port, etc. To enable any of these, check the checkbox and enter a value in the edit box. For instance, if I want macro 2 to be run at power on, I check the checkbox and put a 2 in the edit box. Likewise, I can set the splash screen to bitmap 5 by checking the checkbox and entering a 5 in the edit box. These settings are stored in the SLCD along with all of your bitmap, font, and macro information when you click on the Store into SLCD button. You can also save these values to a bin file by clicking the Save to File button in the binary image load save area. Click the button, it brings up a browse window. You browse to the folder where you want to store the bin file, give it a file name, it'll append a .bin to it, and click Save. You now have a bin file with all of this information, including your settings. We can test this by undoing the settings, and then click the Load from Bin file, select the file, and open it, and you see the settings came back. The names of your bitmaps and macros and fonts are not present because they're in a binary image format, they're not in files. At this point, if you click Store into SLCD, it will download the information that was loaded from the bin file. You can use this feature in a manufacturing environment where you want to always load the same exact set of files with the same exact settings. You can find source files for these tutorials at www.reachtech.com/tutorials. If you have any questions, give our team a call at 503-675-6464 or send an email to techsupport at reachtech.com.